Okay, so let's talk about one of the strangest, most tragic blunders in all of naval history. It's called the Dogger Bank Incident, and it's a wild story about how the Russian Navy made a truly catastrophic mistake.
So picture this. It's October 1904. You're in the middle of the North Sea. It's dark, it's foggy. And then, boom, the night just erupts. The massive warships of the Imperial Russian Navy are opening fire with everything they've got. It looks like a full-blown naval battle has just kicked off.
But here's the insane part. They weren't shooting at enemy warships. Their target was a fleet of totally unarmed British fishing trawlers who were just, well, they were just out there fishing.
So you have to be asking, how on earth does something like this happen? How does one of the world's biggest navies, miles and miles from any actual enemy, mistake a bunch of fishermen for a hostile fleet? Well, the answer is a crazy mix of war, deep-seated paranoia, and just sheer unbelievable incompetence.
To really get the how, you gotta understand the why. The year is 1904, and Russia is in the middle of this really brutal war with Japan. Now, these Russian ships, they're the Baltic Fleet, and they have been sent on this epic 18,000-mile journey all the way to the Far East to try and save the war. But the thing is, they were already a nervous wreck long before they even left port.
Because this journey wasn't just long, it was a total mental nightmare. From the top down, the entire fleet was absolutely gripped by fear.
And this paranoia, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Oh no, it was being fed to them. Russian intelligence agencies were a complete mess, just pumping the fleet full of bogus reports about Japanese saboteurs and secret warships hiding everywhere. There were rumors flying that Britain, which was officially neutral, was secretly building ships for Japan. The admiral in charge, Rozhesvensky, he was already seeing ghosts, reporting phantom enemy cruisers and balloons. So he gives this one stark order: let absolutely no ship of any kind get close to his fleet. And the one thing they were most terrified of was the torpedo boat. You have to remember, this was a brand new, terrifying weapon back then. So try to put yourself in their shoes. You're on this huge, slow battleship, and you know that somewhere out there in the dark is this tiny, fast boat you can barely see, and it's carrying a weapon that can sink your massive ship in an instant. That threat alone created this unbelievable level of stress for every single sailor. This, right here, is the Russian cruiser Aurora, one of the ships in that very fleet. And get this wasn't even their first screw-up. The fleet's paranoia had already caused them to open fire on some other fishermen near Denmark. The only reason no one got hurt that time was because their aim was just laughably bad. It was a huge red flag, a sign of what was coming.
And that brings us to the night itself. Out on the Dogger Bank, a big fishing area, in all that fog and darkness, all that paranoia was about to explode into pure chaos.
So here's exactly how it all went down. It starts when a supply ship, the Kamchatka, radios in totally panicked, saying it's being attacked by a Japanese torpedo boat. It wasn't. It was a Swedish ship. But that one false report sent a jolt of electricity through the whole fleet. Then, just before 1 a.m., Admiral Rozhesvensky sees these dark shapes in the fog. He's convinced they're Japanese torpedo boats, and he gives the order, open fire. For the next 20 minutes, it's just complete pandemonium. The Russian ships actually start firing on each other. The cruiser Aurora gets hit by friendly fire. On another battleship, the Borodino, sailors literally draw their swords because they think they're about to be boarded by Japanese soldiers.
And the level of incompetence here, it's just staggering. The battleship Oriole alone reportedly fired over 500 shells. 500! And you know what it hit? Absolutely nothing. Not a single target British or Russian. But for all the almost comical errors, this had a very real, very tragic human cost. 3 British fishermen were ultimately killed. 6 others were injured. One of their boats was sunk, and 5 more were badly damaged. And on the Russian side, that friendly fire killed a sailor and a priest on board the Aurora. This wasn't some phantom threat. It was a real tragedy born from a complete delusion.
So you can imagine when word of this attack on unarmed fishermen gets back to Great Britain, the reaction is immediate, and it is furious. The incident became known as the Russian outrage, and it brought 2 of the world's biggest empires to the very edge of war. When the shot-up fishing boats limped back into port, images like this one just lit a fire under the British public. You can see the actual holes from the shells. This wasn't some distant diplomatic issue anymore. This was a violent assault on their own people.
The British newspapers just went to town on them. This quote from the Times of London really nails the feeling of just total disbelief. It says, "It is almost inconceivable that any men calling themselves seamen, however frightened they might be, could spend 20 minutes bombarding a fleet of fishing boats without discovering the nature of their target."
And look, this wasn't just angry headlines. Britain was getting ready for a fight. The press was calling the Russians pirates, but more importantly, the Royal Navy, the most powerful navy on the planet, was mobilized. 28 battleships were ordered to get ready for war, and British cruisers started shadowing the Russian fleet as it sailed south, a constant, menacing reminder of their screw-up.
Eventually, cooler heads did prevail, and the diplomats stepped in to stop a war from breaking out. But what happened next, and the final fate of this Russian fleet, is almost as incredible as the attack itself.
What followed was this amazing contrast. On one side, you got these fishermen from Hull, regular guys brought all the way to Paris to tell their story. And on the other, you have this high-powered, formal international commission. All these diplomats trying to figure out what happened and prevent a massive war.
And the conclusion the commission came to, honestly, it's pretty astonishing. They found that Admiral Rozhesvensky was not to blame for what happened. They said he did everything he could to stop the firing once he figured out what was going on. But even with that verdict, Russia voluntarily paid a huge sum, £66,000, to the fishermen to smooth things over.
Now you'd think, after all that, they'd have learned their lesson, right? Nope. That same supply ship, the Kamchatka, the one that started the whole panic, it got lost from the fleet again and went on to attack a Swedish merchant ship, a German fishing trawler, and a French schooner, firing another 300 shells at enemies that were only in its captain's head. The incompetence, it seems, was incurable.
And that's really the point. The Dogger Bank incident wasn't just some bizarre, isolated mistake. It was a grim omen. It laid bare just how incompetent, poorly trained, and crippled by paranoia the Russian Navy really was. And sure enough, 7 months later, after finally making it all the way to the Pacific, that same fleet was completely and utterly annihilated by the Japanese Navy at the Battle of Tsushima.
In the end, this is what's left. This memorial was put up in Hull to remember the 3 fishermen who lost their lives. It's a permanent, quiet reminder of the very real human price that gets paid when a powerful military loses its grip on reality. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? We like to think of history as this grand game of chess, all about strategy and smart moves. But how often are huge, world-changing events, even ones that bring nations to the brink of war, driven by something much more basic, much more human? Just simple, raw fear, and really, really bad information.